Statistics South Africa recently showed that South Africa's unemployment crisis has risen sharply, and it brings joblessness to 26.7% of the population. Research paints a bleak picture of failing policy interventions in education and, of course, youth employment. Even more worrying is the assertion that particularly young black people are less skilled than their parents were. This is the show tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and I'm joined by the Statistician-General in Cape Town, Pali, Lehohla, to discuss whether or not South Africa is doomed as a result of this. Because, Pali, if South Africa's youth are disempowered from an education perspective, or disempowered because they can't get a job, it does paint a fairly bleak outlook for all of us.
Well, I think it's a major call for us to focus on the National Development Plan and say if it sets the target of 6% unemployment by 2030, and we have 26.7% unemployment now, and that has been the case for the last 7 or so years, although it spiked now, the unemployment rate has been at a high level of about 24% on average right across. And if you add the unemployment level for the discouraged, that is those who have given up and do not have the resources because job search is expensive, we are looking at 36. That is for every 100 people who actually need to work, there are 36 who can't.
I mean, 1 out of 3 of us can't find a job. We are either unemployed or unemployable, and that points toward the crisis. Just take me through the trends, please, because the Labour Force Survey was introduced in 2008, and we are sitting again at levels last seen in 2008. Just take me through the trends as you have witnessed them over the last almost a decade.
2008, the trends were much lower, or rather, let me not say much lower because they were not significantly lower. It was about 24%. The highest we had was in 2002 when we started running the Labour Force Survey, where the unemployment was up in the region of 30%. And it has been gradually falling as the economic growth increased up to the point where we flattened with about 5% growth rates in 2005. Now, what has happened is then at that point we stayed at this high level stability of unemployment with the spiking now. So those are the trends in unemployment. And in the main, they say one thing and one thing only, that the youth bear the brunt of unemployment. If you want to look at the stricter definition of unemployment, those who looked for a job in the last 2 weeks before the survey, then unemployment is those who are unemployed. 2/3 of those who are unemployed are youth. When you look at expanded definition, where you look at those who have given up, unemployment is 36%, and 75% of those are youth. So whichever way you look at it, the magnitude is big, ranging from 2/3 to 75%. Now, that youth is people who are 15 to 34. Life expectancy is increasing and improving, maybe 60 years of life expectancy, maybe 70 years. Now, these people will grow for the next 30 years in that kind of state of a life that is not fulfilled.
And that is the crisis of the future. Forgive me, Pali, for interrupting there. But I mean, that's the crisis we face. Right now, we've got a short-term crisis of disaffected young people. Disaffected young people will grow in numbers over time unless we deal with the structural issues in an economy which simply isn't expanding at a rate or in a way to be more inclusive.
The economy is lackluster. We are hardly making a 1 percentage point growth per annum. Also, that growth is driven by community and social services instead of largely the real economy, manufacturing, mining, and agriculture. So we are in a pretty difficult space, I think. And of course, the subdued demand for manufactured goods, the end of the super cycle of minerals, and then, of course, an unrelenting drought that we saw in the last year.
Now, does your research look deeper into the issues of policy making and policy decisions? Because one sense of it is speaking to people in business and the fact that they're scaling back and cutting back and trimming back on their own businesses as they don't see growth improving over the next year or two, is they're obliged to do it. They feel forced to do it in order to stay in business and thus perpetuating the problem. What is your reading on the deep reasons behind this rise in unemployment?
Well, I think that's the point I was trying to come to when I was saying this group of people are moving up from 15 to 34 to 35 to 60 in a number of years, in another 25 years, without any change in their circumstances, because they are beyond schooling. And education is the only redemption that we have. I'm not suggesting that it's an irredeemable situation, but surely to redeem it, extraordinary measures have to be put in place that focus on those who are 15 to 34. But more importantly, we have to think about those who are 0 to 14 today, who then in another 20 years will be getting to those ages of 34, and will have moved from 15 to 34. Will they be capacitated adequately to address these challenges, or will they continue on the same trend? The point is, at this current trend, even those who are 0 to 14 may face the same plight.
And we're not even...
That's the point. And those 0 to 14 today will have to carry the burden of those who have not worked in their lives. They will have no savings. And they will have to depend on those who are 0 to 14 today.
And we're not even touching yet on the impact of what the World Economic Forum at Davos this year called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're talking about a fairly normal environment in which unemployment is growing. If we start seeing the ability of technology to replace jobs, the ability of technology to replace functions, the more menial functions perhaps that are currently carried out by people, this problem is exacerbated rather than relieved in the next decade or two.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, technology, yes, it may relieve a number of people of jobs, of menial jobs, of all those kinds of jobs. But to use it, you have to be capable of using it. Now, if you don't have the skill to participate in it, there is a real danger and a reality that people will be excluded from this. So even with the power and the benefits of technology, a lot of people will be continuously marginalized, and particularly by technology.
Now,
so there are a lot of very, very difficult things that require policy action. And of course, when you look at the National Development Plan, I think we start seeing the answers to this complex situation that we face.
However, we sit with this wonderful, Trevor Manuel hates it when anybody refers to it as a blueprint, because it's more of a roadmap, it's more of a guide to reach some very lofty goals by 2030. The way things are going right now, that 6% unemployment rate by 2030 is a pipe dream, it would seem. What's your reading of it?
Well, I mean, for those who manage to project, I just measure what has happened.
Sure.
But of course, if what happened is a predictor of the future, and the statistical techniques can be applied to show that, we are heading a direction that is so flat that has not begun to face south in terms of the future. So 6% certainly is not achievable in the foreseeable future. And the burden of it is largely the 15 to 34. There are 8 million people in that bag who are 15, who are not employed. and 2/3 of them are those who are 15 to 34, or 75% of them are those who are 15 to 34. So we are talking about 6 million people who are going through life. It's the whole number of population of Eastern Cape going through life in that kind of state of joblessness.
And when you look at the stats, and I know that you look back rather than look forward, but you are, as a scientist of statistics, able to project forwards looking at history. How scared are you of a jobless future?
Well, the point is the 15 to 34 who are not without skills are already there. And there are 6 million of them. And we are adding on to them. And those who are 0 to 14 are going through a school system that is not changing that much. Those who are post-matric show that the blacks are not, and the colors are not, the throughput is not at the pace that is required. While whites and Indians are at a pace that exceeds what is required. So when you look at the age structures of the Indians and the whites and the age structures of the blacks, you can see this bulge going upwards without participating actively in the economy. They are neither producers or consumers of goods and services. They are a market that is not a market in reality. In part, they are an undernourished component of society of consumers, none of production. Amongst whites and Indians, you can see people whose pyramid is showing progress in terms of production and consumption.
The Statistician-General, Pali Lehohla, I'm sorry to cut you, Pali Lehohla. There was a slight delay on the line, but the Statistician-General, Pali Lehohla, with some very sobering insights, and I thank you very much for those this evening, Pali Lehohla, joining us on the line from Cape Town. We'll talk about more social economic problems facing South Africa in the future. When you just look at the scenarios that are painted by the history, by the statistics, so showing where we come from, and then you look at the projections and where we're going to, and how we simply continue to perpetuate the racial divides in South Africa. It paints a very bleak picture of that shared future. Certainly a crisis in the making if we don't nip it in the bud. The warning this evening from the Statistician-General. Thank you so much for watching. Have a very good evening. Good night.